Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. All right, well, 2022 is going to be a critical year for America. AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens, along with their nearly 2 million members. The fight to stop out-of-control spending in the president's Build Back Better scheme is far from over, and Congress is plotting more legislation that could hurt our seniors. The midterm elections will be a battle for freedom versus socialism. Unlike liberal groups, AMAC is America's conservative, action-oriented 50-plus organization fighting hard every day here in Washington and across the nation for our seniors. So I'm urging you to choose AMAC now. You will receive all of the great membership benefits, including AMAC discounts on hotels, travels, and restaurants, and your membership will support your conservative values. So go to amac.us/Ellis. That's amac.us/ELLIS to become an AMAC member now.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Well, happy Monday, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and if you've been following along with the left's insane agenda, you have seen not only the coordinated attacks against conservatives and all of the censorship going on from big tech, but also how they are pressuring all conservatives to simply deny reality, and they are not allowing people to say simple things like, biological men are men. Or now there has been this multifaceted pressure campaign for Twitter and other big tech oligarchs to not allow conservatives and really anyone to use the word groomer to identify or call out conduct that is specifically referring to the over-sexualization and indoctrination of children by the LGBT insane leftist agenda. So I have been the latest victim of this target because, of course, I'm calling out this behavior, and because my good friend James Lindsay was the one who really started this term that I think is perfectly appropriate. There was a tweet back in April where I called out conduct from an individual who was going to speak at some gay alliance event that he said was at his niece's school. And I called him out and said, this is creepy, and called him a groomer, which was perfectly acceptable. It's also opinion. That tweet, as well as another one, got labeled as quote unquote hate speech, and therefore the violation of Twitter's terms and conditions. Of course, that's not true. Of course, it's not hate speech. But Twitter is now labeling anything and any viewpoint that they don't agree with and they want to silence as hate speech. So what's really going on here? Joining me now is my good friend James Lindsay, who, of course, has been at the forefront of this movement, calling out the leftists for what and who they really are. So thanks for joining me today, James.
Hey, I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah, and love the shirt. So, so
Yeah,
what
thank
is
you very much.
actually yeah? So what's actually going on with this, and why is this, in your view, an appropriate term for labeling this type of conduct?
Those are two questions. The second one's a little more straightforward. So let's cover the appropriateness first, and then we'll probably spend a bit of time talking about what's really going on here. Um, why is it appropriate? Well, up until 15 minutes ago, everybody knew that cult grooming was a thing, that if somebody wanted to get you to join a cult, they might hang out by an airport or they might troll around university campuses to try to find vulnerable people they can victimize, to suck them in and try to get them to join whatever cult it is that they are running, because people, when they transition from one phase of life to another, or they move from one location to another, are extra vulnerable, they're socially isolated, there's a huge transition happening anywhere. It's easy to kind of bring people in and make them friends and then start feeding them a little bit of cult ideas. And they're segregated from the community that might keep them grounded, whether that's family, whether that's old friends, whether that's faith. To a degree, they haven't maybe found a new church or whatever it is that they're doing when they move. And so we've known about cult grooming. We know how cult grooming works. There are entire books about cult grooming explaining how cult grooming works, where there's this kind of whole process of, you introduce these ideas, you make friends with the people, you tell them a little bit, you bring them to a meeting, you tell them a little bit more. When they accept, you affirm, and when they don't, you kind of put some pressures on them to make sure that they might be more interested in having it. You exploit vulnerability. You might tell them, if there was a feminist cult, for example, that, well, you've come to college and it's rape culture everywhere, but we have a thing you can do about that. If you feel scared, we can combat that here, and here's how. So there's this whole back and forth between vulnerability and the resolution of vulnerabilities in the cult doctrine, and then affirming the people that are taking it up. Love bombing them, it's sometimes called, making them feel positive and accepted to bring them further into the group. And then you feed them more and more and more doctrine as you go along, and you segregate them or separate them from people who might tell them otherwise. Oh, those people, they don't want you to know that because they just want to keep rape culture going, or they don't want you to find out the real truth about, Scientology or whatever other thing it happens to be. They don't want you to know. They think it's weird because they don't understand, and you need to separate from them because they don't know what we know. This is cult 101, and cult grooming is a whole process. It's well understood, well documented. And because the left wants to protect the fact that they're doing cult grooming of children in schools, or Maoist brainwashing, if you'd rather, Xinao in Chinese, in schools, using not just sexual topics and gender topics, but also race topics and the whole kind of Marxist suite of ideas, anti-capitalism, this kind of, they call it like watermelon environmentalism, green on the outside, red on the inside, kind of view of climate change and climate justice and redistribution of resources. And Greta Thunberg, how dare you, this kind of view. They know that they're grooming people into a particular view of the world, a particular concept of the world, a particular concept of themselves within that world, in in a cult way. And then when it pairs up with the sexual stuff, they're also teaching children about sex and sexuality at young ages, younger and younger ages, telling them not to tell their parents because their parents might not like it and you might get in trouble. And this is exactly the kind of thing that sexual predators do. Whether the people doing it, in some, many, or all cases, are sexual predators is a question. I don't think most of them are, honestly. I think most of them are queer theorists and narcissists and Marxists who are trying to get them to take up a worldview for political activism. But you lose the ability to filter out the sexual predation when that's normal behavior at school anyway. If you're already talking to kindergartners about sex, when somebody who's doing so inappropriately does so, you have no mechanism to be able to, the child has no mechanism to think something out of the ordinary is happening. Maybe I should tell my parents. And so they're using cutesy terms like affirming care or gender affirming care. That's not what's happening, or social transition. That's not what's happening. They are guiding them into a particular view of themselves and the world, which is grooming into a particular view of themselves and the world for whatever set of agendas, political, sexual, etc. And it has to stop. It's just absolutely inappropriate. And so this is what's happening, and why they're doing it has extraordinarily deep roots. But we can go as far into that as you want, 100 plus years back into the Marxist literature, talking about the use of sexualization of children, for example. This isn't a new concept. So yeah, this is what's happening. They're cult grooming. Sexual grooming comes along for the ride. Think of it like the cult groomer is the boat, and then the predators are the water skiers riding behind the boat. The boat is, the main thing that's happening, but the water skiers coming along for the ride. That's sort of how I see the two versions of grooming. And what the left is trying to do, besides ban it so we can't talk about it and ban us so we can't raise the alarm, what they're trying to do is to narrow down to the sexual grooming and accuse us of saying that the LGBT people are necessarily groomers, and saying that therefore it's a slur and therefore it's hate speech, because we're accusing them of something horrible that in many cases is in fact not true. Uh, and therefore, we're creating this inappropriate association. Uh, that's what they're doing. They're trying to defend the fact that they're cult grooming by narrowing it down to this other thing that they can say, well, that's obviously a slur in many cases.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of people who aren't as familiar with the term of cult grooming are familiar with, at least law enforcement, and others have for years used the term grooming in the context of an adult who is a child predator and who is using their access to the child to gain their trust, to isolate them away from their family or from other important adults in their lives in order to eventually perpetuate a crime on that child. And that term has been used not as a slur, but as merely a fact and a process of what happens. And so when you talk about grooming in general, it simply means conditioning in a lot of ways. And I think, at least for law enforcement, I mean, that's definitely not been a slur. It's just been what they've used to describe a period of time before an act is either perpetuated or attempted to be perpetuated on a child. And that's the timeline that they attempt to capture that behavior in order to hopefully prevent and protect the child from anything bad occurring. So, why is it that this term now, grooming, is somehow so nefarious that it's being labeled as hate speech when really it's simply identifying the conduct of these individuals who have an agenda, and whether or not their behavior ultimately crosses the line into criminal conduct? It certainly is really alarming for parents who don't want their children to be exposed to any of this type of conduct, whether it's sexual identity, sexual orientation, or anything that relates to the overall progressive agenda.
Yeah. So, first of all, what you just described is actually a wonderful article that came out in the Daily Caller today. So, a brand new article in the Daily Caller going through the law enforcement definition and explanation of the process, the stages of grooming, as you described it, as a criminal intention for predation on a child. And the point of the article is that what's happening in the schools matches it tremendously. Uh, Almost exactly, as a matter of fact. And you can read that for yourself, make your own determination. Uh, so this is, I think, exactly what is going on, and why is this becoming the new nefarious term? Is because it's difficult when you deal with the left to talk about this, but on some level, it's almost like they know they're doing something. I don't think they know they're doing something wrong. I think they know they're doing something they're not supposed to. And so they have to cover up for that fact. They have to hide that fact. They know that parents don't want this happening, but they believe fundamentally that they have the authority. They, in fact, have the only possible expertise to possibly raise children correctly. That the reason that we don't live in a Marxist utopia already is because stupid conservative parents are raising their children wrong to become stupid conservative adults in their own turn that won't go communist. And therefore, they have the right and the responsibility to guide the development of children in a different direction. And so they have to, when we stand up and call this out, they have to obfuscate. They have to protect the term. They have to make it so the call out doesn't stick with as big a base of protection and support as they can have. And that's a key of this mechanism, is that they're hiding behind the LGBT community, most of whom are just people who want to live their lives. Most of them are not groomers. Most of them they're disgusted by it, like everybody else is disgusted by it. And they are being used by this agenda as almost human shields, like kind of psychological human shields or whatever, but they're being used as human shields so that, they can say, these people who are doing something that is absolutely unacceptable to most parents, possibly criminal, opening the door to criminality, creating conditions for neglect, etc., where criminality then comes in to fill the space. they know they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing or that's not wanted to be doing. They think they have a right to do it. And they're therefore hiding behind a broader community and saying, you're trying to slander this whole community, dragging up all of these other people that might defend them, or that, they'll get the kind of useful idiots to come out and say, well, you just hate LGBT people. My wife actually got a note from somebody that she hasn't talked to in a number of years just the other day, 2 or 3 days ago. Why is your husband evil? That's the note she got from an old friend.
Wow.
Why is your husband evil? Why do you guys hate LGBT people so much?
I get that all the time. It's like, yeah, you're just a bigot. You hate people. You're just, you're not open to any of this. And it's this wide swath, broad brush.
This is why they're doing it, though, because what they can do is they can create this image of an empathetic community that needs to be protected, et cetera. And then they hold themselves up as the true, kind of avatars or vanguard of what that movement should be about, while they do horrible things in its name. And this is I'm not meaning a literal crime, but it's like the chief moral crime of how these groups operate. They assign themselves the spokespeople for a community, most of whom don't agree with what's happening, and then use them as literally, the kind of moral equivalent of human shields to continue to do their activism. And it works. It gets a lot of people to believe that they're literally people they maybe have known for years are bad people in some way, and that it's been unmasked. Oh my gosh, I always thought you were a good person, but now I know that you hate all these different kinds of people. And no, it's not. It's not even about people. It's about a very specific type of behavior that should not be allowed to continue and should not be perpetrated on children. And if there are people that are doing it intentionally, I feel completely content. I'm not quite Jesus enough for not hating them. People who are doing it intentionally, I have some issues with those people. But people who are just kind of along for the ride and don't realize it, I actually kind of pity them because they've been caught up in something. And that's why I want to be able to sound an alarm so that those people might realize, like, I kind of felt wrong about this. Something might be off. I've got to stop this too and figure out what's going on. It's just a horrible thing that's happening. But it has an agenda behind it, a number of political agendas. A number of financial agendas as it keeps kind of cropping up. It's not hard to guess. You lead the kid into transition or even into just, anxiety or depression through this kind of like age inappropriate, developmentally inappropriate information and behavior around them, what they call generative behavior in the educational parlance. And then what are they going to do? They're going to get on expensive pharmaceuticals. They're going to get on antidepressants. They're going to get on anti-anxiety medications. They're going to maybe go into hormones or into the surgeries or into the puberty blockers, at which point, in many cases, they're going to become patients for life, very expensive patients for life. And there was just an expose I saw last night that came out that the Trevor Project, which is so central to much of this, posing as a anti-suicide hotline or I guess a suicide hotline for young gender dysphoric kids and teens, it turns out that they have a gigantic financial stake attached to them in the pharmaceutical industry, which benefits from this to the tune of huge amounts of money. And that's that's just a financial perversion. That's not even getting into the political agendas, where Marxists have known that sexualizing children estranges them from themselves, their family, their faith, and the history of their culture. And therefore you can create a new society out of children who want to throw off the old society so they can be perverts. So they can be free to be perverts. It doesn't matter that it might take them 5 or 10 years to realize that it ruins their life. In the short term, that's what they want. They want it now. Nobody else understands. So the Bible's obsolete. Their parents don't get it. They are confused about themselves. They can't form categorizations quite right. So they have to defer to an authority. Why do you know that, by the way, Jenna? What is a woman? It's not cute and funny. It's if nobody can say what a woman is with their own eyes, with their own logic, then you have to ask a gender studies expert what a woman is. And so if you say, well, I'm a woman, well, you don't have the authority to declare yourself a woman. Then you have to defer to a gender studies expert to say if you really are one or not.
That's what. Thus, Ketanji Brown Jackson is saying, well, I'm not a biologist or I'm not a gender studies expert. I don't have the authority as just a person looking at reality to say what is what you're saying.
That's right. Everybody missed that. The key moment with what is a woman, that was Senator Marsha Blackburn asked Ketanji Brown Jackson in her confirmation hearing, what is a woman? And she said, I can't answer that question. And then that's not the key moment. Everybody's like, whoa, that's not it. The key moment was when she said, I would have to defer to an authority to know. as if her being a woman itself isn't satisfactory. She has to defer to an authority. Now, we're talking about a accomplished attorney, an adult with a substantial academic pedigree who's literally was being put up for and is now on the Supreme Court. We're not talking about a child. Take a 5-year-old now. All you're going to do is train them that they don't know what the world is around them unless they defer to an authority. What you're doing in that case is you're not just cult grooming them, you're grooming them into following blindly behind an authority who's going to tell them what the right thing to do is, the wrong thing to do is, how to feel about this, how to feel about that. And so if, say, there's a school shooting in Texas, what happens the next day? Providence, Rhode Island, hundreds of students are led to go out of school, lay down on the state house steps in Providence and do a die-in for political activism on school time. Propped up by our favorite twerker, Tiara Mack, on Twitter is this kind of awesome moment of look how active the students are, look how they care so much about this issue. So what you do is you groom them to look to the authority being a teacher who happens to be a leftist political activist who then says, let's go protest right now. And they just do. And the interpretation of what happened, barring all facts, is whatever that authority figure tells them it is. They have a whole program for this that has swept all of our education to the tune of billions and billions of dollars now, called social and emotional learning, that leads kids into understanding the world the way that some facilitator is teaching them to understand the world. And we're not allowed to call it grooming, which is very obviously what it is, grooming them to see the world in a particular way.
Mm-hmm. And programming and indoctrination. And so I guess the obvious question then would be, okay, if you have to defer to an authority just to be confident of the reality that you can observe yourself as a rational human being, how is that then consistent with the left's objective as well, that you need to live your truth and however you feel determines reality when there's no objective measurement? And so are they trying to simply say, well, you need to feel however the authority makes you feel, and then however you feel ultimately is your truth? Or how is that consistent in their paradigm?
Well, you kind of touched on it. They're teaching people how to feel about things. Your truth is going to be the authority because that's narcissistic and all of this stuff. So you get them, well, you really know. You know something nobody else knows. You know what's true for you better than anybody else, and don't let anybody step over this. It's very appealing. It gets them very latched in. But then simultaneously, they're using, literally, the program is called social and emotional learning. They're teaching children what the correct understanding of social circumstances and emotional responses is supposed to be. For example, under social and emotional learning, they talk a lot about resilience. But if you look at how we're going to teach children to be resilient, and everybody's like, yes, there's a lot of stress in the world. We want our children to be resilient. But what they mean by resilient is that you don't flip out and reject what they're cramming down their throats. If you reject it, that would be, say, white fragility. That's a lack of resilience. So they flipped resilience over so that, one of the goals of social and emotional learning is to teach children to be resilient. What it actually means is to be compliant. And so the goal is that they're going to teach the children to believe that they're going to say your emotions guide your truth. This is basically dialectical phenomenology to get deeply philosophical. They're going to teach children that your truth is the truth. Your perception of reality is reality. That's kind of phenomenology. And as it unfolds, that you're becoming the thing that you might possibly be or that you were always meant to be. So it has a telos attached to it. It's very religious. But let us make sure that we guide you, that we facilitate you to the correct understanding. So if you're in a position of oppression, then you need to understand what that oppression really feels like, so you can understand the emotional reactions you're having but don't have names for. If you're in a position where you're privileged, you don't even know that you're dehumanizing other people and thus dehumanizing yourself. So let us train you to understand, so that you want to become an anti-racist, so that you want to become a queer activist, so that you want to become an LGBTQ ally, or whatever it happens to be, so that you maybe want to consider taking on a new gender or sexual identity and living as your true self that you can become over time through a process of transition. This is quite literally what how those things come together, is that they're going to tell children that which you feel is what is correct, it is true. We've had a conversation before that where Christianity is in some sense a religion of logos. This is a religion of pathos, of feeling and emotion and affect. Mm-hmm. So what you feel is the arbiter of true. And then now let us tell you to make sure that you understand your feelings correctly. And they're going to teach them to feel the way that they're supposed to feel about everything. which then becomes true by this kind of circular process. We could get all deep into the difference between poesis and praxis, going back to the Greeks with the poetics versus the practice or praxis side of development. Poetics or poesis is when you build something to make it into what it's supposed to be. So you go build a house, but the means, the carpentry or whatever else, don't really have anything to do with the end. The end is a house, and then you go away and you stop doing activism. This is what civil rights activism is supposed to look like. It should be, in a sense, poetic. That you come in, you do the thing, you achieve the right, you get the legal change or whatever it happens to be, and then you go home. And everybody's happy that it changed. And most LGBT people wanted that with equality. On the other hand, there's this praxis. And that's like becoming a martial artist. You never really become the best martial artist you can be. You just keep training. So the means and the end are wrapped together into the same thing. So this is where the activists, as soon as they get their first agenda, they have a list of demands, and half of the demands are vague, so they can keep doing it forever. And so what you end up with is that the poesis version of changing the world or doing something in the world creates the thing you want to see in the world, and then you go home because it's there. The praxis version that this is actually based in, go look up their documents. Praxis, it's everything's praxis. You never actually achieve the goal. You're just in a perpetual state of becoming. Like when, say, for example, you begin your gender affirming process and you go into social transition and you go into medical transition. And at what point does the young woman become a boy? Never. The young woman is always becoming a trans man, never gets there. So it's a matter of praxis at that point. And that's how their political activism is organized. And these are very old. Like I said, that's Greek. That's the Greek distinction between two different types of, say, activism or activity, going all the way back, 2,800 years. And what has happened is we've lost kind of the degree of sophistication to understand that the two are different. And the left is playing in one without telling us, to the point now where they're getting children to engage in a praxis-based mutilation of their own bodies on the promise that they'll get somewhere they'll never get. And when they get there, it'll resolve the anxiety, depression, and other dysphorias and things that they've been experiencing that's literally been induced and increased. Here's an example.
Wow.
Concrete example. I just saw the article the other day. Did you know that there's a long history of racism in being a tomboy? Nobody knew that because it's
Nobody
BS.
knew that, but racism apparently is everything. Yeah.
But now imagine yourself as an 11-year-old girl who likes to play sports and run around in jeans and a t-shirt and doesn't want to wear a dress and likes to catch frogs or whatever it happens to be. And now you're like, am I complicit in racism when you hear this because you're 11 and you're impressionable? But you have an option. You don't have to be a tomboy. You don't have to be a girl who's doing it wrong and participating in racism. You can enter into this process of praxis. So they're inducing the vulnerability. This 11-year-old girl has been lied to about what it means that she likes to play sports. And now she feels uncomfortable. And they say, do you know you have an option to resolve this discomfort? That option is we can come start to, socially transition you. And we will engage in affirming care. We will constantly affirm and celebrate as you unfold that maybe you really are a boy inside, and we can transform you toward a boy, but never quite into a boy, at which point that the feeling of vulnerability that we manufactured in you will start to resolve. But you notice it never resolves. You never get there. And so it's, how is this not cult grooming? And this doesn't involve somebody's going to sexually predate this child anywhere in that particular example. How does this not involve, how is the word grooming wrong for that? How is it the inappropriate word? What word is better?
Right. It's the definition of the behavior that you're describing. And a couple of things stood out to me in what you just said. First, this goes back to a lot of these adults who are themselves victims of grooming, who then become these allies or these queer theorists, and they don't even realize the nefarious, more evil underlying participation of that they're participating in with this insane worldview. They're just continuing along because they think and they've bought into the notion that it's loving, it's affirming, all of these other things. But then on the flip side of it, the right also doesn't realize how deep this goes, because when you see most of the objections and you see, like you were even describing the reaction to Ketanji Brown Jackson, that most people missed it. And so that we go with just targeting the really easy sorts of examples that we then talk on a very surface level without saying, okay, there is something far deeper here. So how can conservatives begin to fight back on all of this with understanding of the deeper level? I mean, I know that you have been an outspoken advocate in trying to educate everyone on all of these things for years, and you are probably the foremost expert in, not that we have to borrow James Lindsay's authority, but just because you are rationally describing what all of us can observe. But how can we then fight back against the real underlying issue and not just push back on kind of this surfacey top level of, people going, okay, groomer, well, why is that hate speech, and talking about it on that level?
Yeah, I hate to tell people the bitter pill over and over and over again, because we all have better things to do, or so we think. We all have lives. But the truth turns out to be very simple. You actually have to learn to see at least a couple of layers down. This isn't impossible to learn. You don't have to defer to my authority. I encourage you to go listen to things that I've said and be skeptical and question them. Many people who have followed my work, who have read, for example, my book, Cynical Theories, which many people have read, will know that we were quite adamant that we refused to call what's happening Marxist. At the time of writing that, we finished the draft in summer of 2019 and published it in summer of 2020, during which time we could have shifted that. So as little as 2 years ago this month, we were still not willing to call it Marxist. And I've been asked many times why I focus on the Marxist or communist aspects of it now. And to borrow from Thomas Sowell, because facts. The evidence, as I kept reading it, overwhelmed me, which means you can use me as a jumping off point. Go read the things I read, see if I read them wrong. My podcast is me reading entire academic papers and chapters of books. So you can hear what the book says, and you can decide it. And while I interpret it, you can decide if I'm doing it wrong. You don't have to listen to me. Go read the books yourself. See what they say. You do have to learn what the words mean. You do have to learn to look a layer beneath the surface. And then once you do that, see what you see. And then what can happen is people will stop missing. When Ketanji Brown Jackson goes up there and what is a woman and nobody knows, and then Matt Walsh releases a documentary and everybody's laughing at that weirdo that's all uncomfortable and saying, well, I'm very uncomfortable with you talking about objective reality at all, or whatever, or can a chicken cry, that other weirdo. What you have to realize is that the program here is to set that person up as the person that the Supreme Court justice is going to listen to answer a question as simple as what is a woman. Those are the people who are going to become empowered. And then it's at that point you realize, wait a minute, this is not the left being stupid. This is the left engaging in a power grab. It's not funny that Kamala Harris is sitting at a table saying what color her clothing is. That's not stupid. That's a humiliation ritual to make people who know it's dumb pretend it's not dumb. It's called preference falsification. It's an induced preference falsification, and it deepens cult adherence. You actually should probably go read some of this material that's been published about what does a cult look like. Steve Hassan has a model, the BITE model. Robert J. Lifton has written a lot about it. I was reading his book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, a study of brainwashing in China, on a plane recently, and looking out the window after I have to take it in pieces and put it down for a minute because it's rough. And I'm thinking, this can't happen here. And then it just pops into my head. It's like, but this is what DEI training is. It's literally the same thing. Wait, this is what's happening in our schools. This is already happening here, and they're doing it to children. They're forcing people through it in workplaces. And he's describing the prisons in Maoist China where they thought reformed or brainwashed people. And you have to go learn some of this stuff. There's no other answer. And once you start to learn it, it's as people often say, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you can see what they're doing, and you can kind of see what their agenda is, and you can predict why they're doing it. And then it becomes easier to speak up about it, because the left is depending on you to get mad, complain, and then miss the target every single time. They want you to shoot your arrow wide and not even miss the bullseye, miss the target completely. They want you to do that. And then they are laughing as they're running sideways with the target that you couldn't hit, off to the next thing. Again and again and again and again. Same thing with the drag queens. The point of the drag queen is they wrote a paper about it, to induce through what they call generative education, the idea of living queerly. They even say in the paper that they deliberately sell it. They know it's a marketing strategy as inducing LGBT empathy, but that the goal is to induce people into a new way of living, a political way of living queerly. And the people are children, young children in many cases. They say in the paper as well that, well, we brand it as family friendly. And maybe that is because parents and grandparents will come in and watch and cheer and carry on. We see this all over the place. Everybody's hometown apparently has now had a drag show for children. But they say in the next part of the sentence, they say, but we actually mean family in the sense of the queer family you leave your actual family for and live with on the street when your family gets kicked out. The boogeyman they erected in the 90s of the terrible conservative parent who disowned their kids for being gay has grown up and is terrorizing our society. So many, we call them wine moms or white liberal moms or whatever, are so horrified that they're not going to be inclusive enough of their children that they're actually encouraging this as kind of a virtue signal to say, I'm on the side that wouldn't have disowned my kids back in the 90s when we were all horrified by learning about that as people our age were growing up and seeing it. And we're, of course, the parents' age people now. And that monster is now grown up and it's maiming and mutilating both physically and psychologically children, our children. And in fact, if it was just their own children, it would be a horrific circumstance, but it's actually in the school. So it's all the children. And what conservatives need to do is learn to see what it is, learn to see the agenda behind it, learn to call that out clearly, and fight vigorously to defend the rights of parents to have the right and the capacity to raise their own children, and especially in terms of values, education, or whatever, in the way that they think is most appropriate.
Yeah, we can't afford to be passive, and we also can't afford to not be educated on these issues and understand what's really going on. And so I think for everyone listening, the key here, as you said, is to actually go and read all of this for yourself so that you don't miss these signs, you don't miss what's really going on, and you can stand up and you can speak out, because the more people who actually understand what is really happening beneath the surface and what their actual agenda is, not just what they tell you on the mainstream media, even the conservative networks, they are missing it as well. They're not getting it. They also have a political agenda. But to actually understand what it is, and you have to stand up as a parent, as a member of your own family, even if you don't have any kids. Like me, I don't have any kids, but I have nephews, and I have a family, and I understand how this is impacting America and all of our kids, and this matters. And so we have to make sure that we aren't just saying, wow, that's really bad, well, this is a terrible commentary on our culture, and then move right along and not really do anything about it. Because if the left can harness so many people to become activists, why is it that conservatives can't advocate for the truth, and we can't take the time out of our daily lives to make sure that we are understanding what is really going on and truly how to protect our culture? Because I've said for a long time, Andrew Breitbart has said that politics is downstream from culture, but culture is downstream from worldview. And when you influence worldview of kids and of the next generation, that is going to become the culture that will then determine politics. And so people like to just go into the political sphere first, but I would encourage everyone, exactly what you just said, James, go back and be at the tip of the spear for worldview, because that's where hearts and minds are changed. And that's where ultimately we will affect culture and then affect politics. And so if we care at all about what it means to be a conservative, what it means to be an American, we have to care about worldview. So I've kept you over even longer than you had, and I so appreciate your insights. I could talk to you for so long, James, but where can people find you, find your podcast and all of these resources? And thank you so much for this brilliant description today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. You can find my stuff at my company, which is called New Discourses. Somebody just joked and said that when I say it quickly, it sounds like I'm saying nudist courses, like nudist courses, like learn how to be a nudist. We bought that domain too, though. So if you type that in, you'll get there. But it is newdiscourses.com, or I suppose nudistcourses.com, because we bought both domains and they redirect. New Discourses is the name of the podcast. It's on the website. You can find it through there to whatever your favorite podcast listening platform is. You can search it, New Discourses, and find it. It has a little black square with a gray and white brain looking thing. Well, it is a brain on it. So that's what you can go look for. I'm on social media for the time being. We'll see how long that lasts, at Conceptual James. So please come find me, come interact, maybe find other ways to follow me than just Twitter, because Twitter is on a rampage, as we all know. But at Conceptual James, at New Discourses, and newdiscourses.com is where to pay attention to what's happening with me.
Well, and maybe the nudist courses will be your satire site. So look forward to that. That would be hilarious.
Well, we could. That would be fun.
Yeah, that would be great. But, hopefully I'll be back on Twitter in about a week. We'll see. But, all of these social media giants and the tech oligarchs aren't going to put up with a lot of it for very much longer. But that doesn't mean that we should be silent or we should just play into their games and be intimidated. So, as your shirt says, we all need to be calling out and saying, okay, groomers, I mean, this is the reality of what it is. And definitely follow James. I always learn a lot from all of our conversations and really appreciate your friendship. So thanks so much again for joining me.
Yeah, always great to see you.
Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. MyPillow is having their biggest sheet sale of the year. You all have helped build MyPillow into the amazing company that it is today. Now, Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO, wants to give back exclusively to you, his listeners. The Percale bed sheet set is available in a variety of colors and sizes, and they are all on sale. So, for example, the queen size is regularly priced at $89.98, but is now only $39.98 with our listener promo code Jenna, Jenna. So order now, because when they're gone, they're gone. The Percale bed sheets are breathable and have a cool and crisp feel. These come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so don't miss out on this incredible offer. There's a limited supply, so be sure to order now. You can call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna, or go to mypillow.com/Jenna. You can click on the radio listeners square and use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. Thank you so much to all of Mike Lindell's listeners and listeners of this podcast for making sure to support MyPillow and using our exclusive listener promo code Jenna. That's Jenna.